I think that the financing of many programs was already scarce, but at least there was a policy and consensus that it was important. Now they are questioning that, and that's why we are here.
Argentina legalized abortion in 2020, but Javier Milei has said Argentine society should reconsider the law and even discuss the possibility of a national referendum. Women rights groups also say there's a femicide in Argentina every 25 hours. Malena Maidana was 26 years old and was killed in Buenos Aires in February. Her family was part of the demonstration on Monday.
Her killer is in prison, but we want to make sure he won't be released. That's why we are marching now.
For years, Argentina was a regional leader in women's rights. But women here say that the fight right now is no longer about advancing those rights, but defending the ones they already won. Teresa Bo, Al Jazeera, Buenos Aires.
Well, Death Valley in the western United States is known for being the hottest and driest place in the country. But visitors are flocking there right now to catch a glimpse of a rare super bloom. The once-in-a-decade event has seen long dormant flowers spring through the desert soil. It's transformed the barren landscape into lush carpets of purple and gold. Well, that's all from me, Tom McRae, for the moment. You can find much more news and information on our website. That's aljazeera.com. Coming up next, Inside Story examines what the election of a new supreme leader means for Iran. Stay with us. A new supreme leader in Iran, Ayatollah Mojtaba Khamenei, replaces his assassinated father. His selection sends a defiant message to the US and Israel as they attack the country. So who is Iran's new leader and what does his appointment mean? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Tom McRae. Iran has a new supreme leader, Ayatollah Mojtaba Khamenei, coming out on top of the Islamic Republic's complex process to pick the most powerful man in the country. He takes over from his late father, Ali Khamenei, assassinated on the first night of the US and Israel's attacks, which also killed his wife, son, mother and sister. The new leader did not hold any formal position until now, but was a figure of major influence behind the scenes with strong support within the crucial pillars of state. His elevation is a defiant rejection of US President Donald Trump's demand that he approve whoever the next leader would be. Both Israel and the US have threatened to pursue whoever comes into this role. So what does his selection mean for Iran and for the conflict with the US and Israel? And will it bring any change in Iran's strategy, including attacks on other countries? We'll speak to our guest shortly, but first, this report from Imran Ullah Khan.
This is the moment Mojtaba Khamenei, the 56-year-old son of Iran's late supreme leader, is announced as the country's new leader. For most Iranians, Mojtaba's story begins at the age of 17, when he went to the front lines during the Iran-Iraq War, while his father served as Iran's president. The troops he fought with would later form what became the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, now Iran's most powerful military institution. Mojtaba Khamenei has long been seen as the influential figure behind the scenes, playing a role in the appointment of senior officials and shaping Iran's security institutions through his father's office. In the days leading up to his selection, US President Donald Trump warned that Mojtaba's rise would be unacceptable to Washington. But many in Iran's political and military establishment saw those remarks as interference, further strengthening support for his appointment. Those familiar with Mojtaba Khamenei describe him as even less flexible than his father. Mojtaba's father, mother, sister, wife, son, and several other relatives were recently killed in strikes by US and Israeli forces. Many believe this loss could shape his outlook and possibly push Iran towards a more confrontational path. But some analysts argue the opposite may happen. Under heavy pressure from war and international isolation, they say the government now faces two difficult choices: collapse or transform. Because Mojtaba carries the legacy of his father and the revolutionary establishment, They argue he may have the legitimacy to push difficult reforms without being accused of betraying the revolution. But time may not be on his side. Israeli officials have repeatedly threatened to target any successor to Iran's assassinated supreme leader. But the challenge goes beyond external threats. Many in Iran see his appointment as dynastic, arguing that the revolution which toppled a monarchy has now produced another. Under Iran's constitution, Mujtaba Khamenei is both the country's highest political authority and the supreme religious leader for millions of Shias in Iran and beyond. Whether he can unite the country, end the war, and reopen Iran to the world, or lead it into deeper confrontation and isolation, may define the future of the Islamic Republic. Imran Ullah Khan, Al Jazeera, for Inside Story.
Okay, let's bring in our guest now in Tehran. Hassan Ahmadian is an associate professor at the University of Tehran. In Doha, Mehran Kamrava, professor at Georgetown University in Qatar. He's also a director of the Iranian Studies Unit at the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies. And in Washington, D.C., Alex Fatanka, Senior Fellow at the Middle East Institute. Thanks so much for being with us here on Inside Story. We really do appreciate your time. Hassan, if I can begin with you first. You're in Tehran. Can you just give us an idea of how his appointment's actually been received by everyday Iranians? Obviously, there are many social divisions within the country, but what have they been saying to his appointment?
Well, the reactions that we've seen are people cheering up in the streets, filmed by Iranian state media, as expected in a society that has different opinions, and there were divisions before this, and the war brought them to a halt. But yet there are different opinions on how he is received. I think the fact that his entire family was murdered by the American and Israeli attack in the beginning of the war increased his public appeal. I think the Assembly of Experts chose a strong leader to lead the country, not to be led by its institutions. And that was one of the criteria they, I think, focused on choosing him to lead the country. And that, I think, will have an effect on his public appeal as well. He has pretty much all the credentials that a supreme leader, according to the Iranian constitution, should have, basically. And so I think that adds to his appeal in the public. But of course, there will be, and there are some who are critical. There are different factions in Iran's internal politics, as you know, who might prefer different candidates to lead the country. But at this point, the Assembly of Experts indirectly is choosing the supreme leader on behalf of the people who chose the Assembly of Experts. And so they have the mandate to do it. And the assembly is basically designed in such a way to be the most immune institute within Iran to internal and external influence. And I think that played to Ayatollah Mujtaba Khamenei's favor.
Okay, Mehran, this was a man who really appears in public. There is an unknown quality about him. How much influence did he already have inside the system, and what do you make of his appointment?
Well, as you mentioned, we know very little about him, at least in the public domain. But we do know that he was extremely active in his father's office. He was involved in some of the most important decisions of the state, particularly over the last decade or so, when his father became intimately involved in the day-to-day running of the state. And we know that he's got connections throughout the Iranian deep state, particularly within the radio and television network, in the Revolutionary Guards, among the Iranian parliament called the Majlis. And so he has been someone who has been involved, not necessarily in the public domain, but from behind the scenes. He's been actively involved in the running of the state, and he knows how a very complex political system like the Iranian system operates and functions. And so obviously at a time when the system is confronting a serious existential crisis. It wants continuity. It wants somebody who knows the ropes and how the system operates. And apparently, according to internal calculations, Mojtaba Khamenei appears to be the right man for the right time.
Alex, is that how you see things at this point as well? And what message do you think that this sends to the likes of the United States and Israel?
Tom, I think here in Washington, clearly, the appointment of Mojtaba Khamenei is going to be seen as a rejection of President Trump's sort of call for, let's see if we can work something out, if you will. I mean, the president had made that clear. He was trying to insert himself into that Iranian policymaking process. We heard from Foreign Minister Araghchi saying over the weekend, that's never going to happen. This is an internal Iranian affair. But the American president is so preoccupied with optics. I don't know why he wanted himself inserted in that decision-making. But here we are. Mojtaba Khamenei is the new Iranian supreme leader. A couple of quick points I point out, Tom. Look, Iranians, by and large, and I think that's the reading here in the United States, don't know much about Mojtaba Khamenei. He's 56 years old. There are a couple of videos about him out there. We don't know even this, the sound of his voice. We don't know if he's a good speaker. His father spent 8 years as president. The people of Iran knew him before he became supreme leader. Mojtaba Khamenei is essentially behind-the-scene operator. And he's seen to be much closer to the intelligence services than, say, the clerical establishment. So his religious credentials is not what's going to, propel him forward. And in that sense, in many ways, basically, I think here in Washington, Mojtaba Khamenei is seen as the symbolic figure now who will keep the theocracy in place. But essentially, it's the IRGCs, the Revolutionary Guards, is now running the show more than ever before. And that raises some interesting questions for Donald Trump, because if he wanted to avoid dealing with the IRGC, he can't do that anymore. And then final point, Trump, Ali Khamenei took a number of years to essentially, work himself into that role when he became supreme leader at the age of 49 back in 89. His son will have the same. He will need a number of years to find a way, if he can find a way, to work himself into that role. And the big question is, to Mehran's point, does he want to be a micromanager like his father, or does he want to decide to maybe be more of a religious, symbolic figurehead and let the rest of the regime deal with the many challenges that the country's facing?
Hassan, if I can come to you now, I guess essentially, will he have the same clout as his father? And how much time do you think that the Iranian people will give him to find his feet in the role?
I think he already does to a large extent, specifically because of what Mehran said earlier. He was, in his father's office managing many of the files that his father was managing. He has been an Ayatollah for 10 plus years now, teaching as an Ayatollah in the seminary. He has very good connections with different state institutes, as we hear, including, of course, military and security apparatuses, but also different factions within the country. I think, as I said, they chose a strong leader. They chose a strong leader to fill the vacuum that the assassination of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei left the country in. And I think it won't be that long for him to showcase that strength and his capability to consolidate the system and the political system in a way that no vacuum is left at all in the system.
Mehran, the Islamic Republic was actually created to oppose hereditary rule, and yet he's obviously taking over from his father. So does this really go against the principles of the Islamic Republic, and what impact is that going to have, do you think?
This is an important point that you raise, and I think it's going to take a couple of decades to really figure out the consequences of what has just happened theologically, in terms of the theological evolution and development of Shiism. Because, as you mentioned, the Islamic Republic was anti-monarchical. But also, let's remember that Shiism theologically has had a strand within it that has been strongly family oriented in terms of succession, the line of succession passing within the family of various Shia imams and Shia ulama. So it would be interesting to see how in the years ahead, if the Islamic Republic lasts a few years, it would be interesting to see how there are theological justifications and innovations to explain what has just transpired. At least in the immediate run, what we're seeing is that Shia theology has been almost completely set aside for the sake of political expedience in Iran.
Alex, his father had actually said long before this war started, my son will not succeed me. And many said that he was one of the least likely to actually be selected had his father died of natural causes. So what does that tell us about the message here to the rest of the world?
Look, I think the message the rest of the world for now need to take is if you want to look at the Islamic Republic as an Islamist system with different factions in it, some on the softer side, some on the hardline side, more ideological. I mean, inside of Iran, they refer to them as the technocrat versus the hardliners. It's the technocrats right now that obviously are going to be wondering what's going to happen to them. Because, you know, at least on paper, President Masoud Pezeshkian, the administration, the presidential office, they lean on the technocratic side. For example, we know a few days ago when President Pezeshkian made that video telling the regional neighbors that, you know, we're sorry, we apologize for some of these attacks on our neighbors. Quickly, he had to walk that back because the hardline ideological quickly said to him, no, that's not what we're going to do, at least not right now. So I think that's going to be very interesting to see, because right now, the hardliners, these are the men with the missiles, with the drones, with the military capacity. They are in the driver's seat, but they don't actually have a long-term solution to Iran's many, many problems. They don't. The only way of looking at the world is through resistance. And that's been the approach that has resulted in losing essentially the Iranian people and creating the conditions where they're at this war being attacked by the United States and Israel. So, you know, going forward, it's not so much whether Mujtaba Khamenei one morning is going to wake up and decide, I'm going to walk a different direction than my father. It's more the question that will there be a consensus in the Revolutionary Guards and the other sort of deep state elements to say, we can't continue being on this path anymore. If there's one way this regime can survive, it's to make a fundamental break with the past and go in a different direction. And again, Mujtaba Khamenei would not be the architect of that. He'll be the face of it. But in the short term, I don't think he's got the political power to be able to be the architect of it. But he could be the public face of it going forward. And we just have to wait and see what the IRGC leaders decide what's best for them, their interests, and whether they, in terms of survival of the regime.
OK, Hassan, what's your take on that? I mean, we saw very mixed messages coming out of Iran's leaders over the last few days, with Masoud Pezeshkian having to walk back some comments after he apologised to the Gulf states for attacking them. Do you think that the new Supreme Leader is actually going to be able to, I guess, bring everyone together and have a unified voice when it comes to the messaging that it's trying to send to the rest of the world?
I think the mere fact that the Assembly of Experts gathered to choose a Supreme Leader is because they felt that the Council of Leadership is not enough to fill the gap in times of crisis that Iran is in. Otherwise, there were risks for them to convene and elect the Supreme Leader. But they took it because I think the need for a single leader who can be strong enough to lead the country in times of peril like this one was in their minds, and they went for it. So he would have a final say. The minute he was elected Supreme Leader, he has the final say on war and peace. And I think that will have a lot of influence on how things will go with regards to the war efforts. You know, the main priority at this point for the Supreme Leader and also for the entirety of the system is how to manage the war efforts vis-a-vis the aggression the country is facing. Another priority, I think, will come after the war ends, a ceasefire maybe, that is economics, and he has been promoted by people familiar with him as an anti-corruption figure. Both the war, the management of war, and the anti-corruption campaign, if it unfolds, I think both will increase his popularity, because these are things that many of the Iranians are unsatisfied with, right, especially the economics, and they want to see different management of the economic position. So I think he will push for change in the economics of the country once this war comes to a halt.
Well, at this point in time, it seems like that is a long way off, because, Mehran, if I can bring you in here, ever since he was elected, we've seen Iran's war efforts continue in the same path that it was on. Many Gulf states were attacked just hours after he was elected. Do you expect to see that to continue, that these attacks on the likes of Qatar, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, will go on unabated? And what message does that send to the Gulf countries?
Well, I don't expect, or I did not expect, the selection of a new supreme leader would necessarily foster changes in Iran's conduct of the war. But I think Hassan makes a very important point. One of the things we saw with Ali Khamenei over the last couple of years, several years in fact, was that he was simply incapable of modifying his positions. He was inflexible, and he often would harp on a position that he would not back out of. And I think a new leader, even if it's a leader from within the depths of the deep state, even if it's his son, gives Iran an opportunity to change course in a way that Ali Khamenei was either unwilling or unable to do. Now, the war is different. The conduct of the war has confronted the Islamic Republic with an existential crisis. And Iran is going to, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards and the Iranian military, they're going to hit American targets or American allies and the United States and Israel whenever and however they can, or their abilities allow them to do. But I think one of the things we should expect is, with the departure of Ali Khamenei, the question then becomes, is Mojtaba Khamenei able to change course on the ship that's the Islamic Republic, or is it a ship that has committed itself to irrevocable sinking? I think that's the important question.
OK, Alex, but before we get to that, though, will he even be allowed to change course? Because we know that the Israel and US have already said that they were going to target and try and kill any new leader, regardless of who it was. So how under threat is he at this point in time? Because we've seen the US and Israel obviously be very effective in targeting Iranian leaders, whether they're political or military, through this war.
Yeah, I make a distinction. I think the American side is much more cautious and hesitant in terms of assassinating any foreign leader. The Israelis, obviously, they're in a different place. They've been doing this for a long time. They think this is the way that they're going to take the war of their enemies to them. So, yeah, I mean, Mojtaba Khamenei would have all the reasons in the world to take precaution, because he will presumably be a target. But listen, this also, Tom, raises the bigger question of, if you are where I am in Washington, D.C., right now, the message coming from the White House is regime change at this level through military action alone is not likely. The Israelis are echoing the same thing. So if that's where you're at, just taking out Mojtaba Khamenei without really having a bigger political game, what do you achieve? I mean, what does that achieve? And that takes us to the fundamental issue of, what is it the U.S. and Israel want? We think, those of us who watch this space, the Israelis are very clear. I mean, Bibi Netanyahu for 40 years has wanted to end the Islamic Republic. So no surprises there. But we also know he doesn't have the capacity to go and by force change the regime in Iran. Israel, just a country of 9 million people, can't do that, which means, can the Israelis bring Trump into this war in a bigger fashion, including the mention of boots on the ground? Again, that's a very tough challenge for Trump. I'm not just talking about the price of oil today or the anger that we're seeing in the Middle East from U.S. partners who are saying to President Trump, why did you start this war? But American public opinion, which as of today is still pretty much against this war. So that is really the key question. If the U.S. decides, I can invest, and I shouldn't say U.S., I should really say Trump decides, I can't invest in regime change for whatever it's worth. I am looking for change of regime behavior. Takes us again to Mehran's point. And again, not so much Mujtaba Khamenei, the man, but the leadership who brought him to this position, can they come to an agreement that they need to change course? Because Ali Khamenei was not somebody who compromised. He really didn't compromise. If he had compromised, Iran would not be bombed today. His son and the people around his son have different calculations to make for their own survival, for the sake of their own survival and what's left of the country of Iran. This is not just about Islamic Republic. This is about the survival of Iran as one country.
Do you think that, Hassan, that he will be able to make that pivot, to make that calculation, do you think, and try and find some sort of, in the short to medium term, an off-ramp from the conflict?
I think he basically radiates change and continuity. Continuity in the pillars of the Islamic Republic, the most important of which is independence. But also him being from the second generation of the Islamic Republic, very close to folks from the second and third generation, familiar with new tech and high tech. It seems that's part of why, according to the Assembly of Experts, he was chosen. This also tells us that there are changes coming under his leadership. In fact, Imam Khomeini and Ayatollah Khamenei, his father, have had this personal effect on the position of supreme leadership. And I think he won't be an exception. But when it comes to the conflict, I pretty much reflect what Kamran said. I think for him to go for a ceasefire at this point will be a losing battle within Iran's politics, but also when it comes to Iran's independence. A ceasefire at this point would mean 6 months from now or 8 months from now, the country will be attacked again. The aim for this military effort on the part of Iran against the aggression that was waged on the country is not only a ceasefire, but to make sure to inflict much pain that the others cannot attack Iran every now and then at will, but to make calculus, to think twice and thrice before attacking the country. That's why you hear from the Ali Larijani, the Supreme National Security Council, head of that council, and also the Speaker of the Parliament, who has a role in managing the war efforts. Both are, reflecting on this, that they attacked us, they imposed an immense cost on us, they killed our leader. We will take revenge from them. We will impose costs on them in the region so that they won't come again and attack us again. Right. That, I think, the line of thinking that the new supreme leader will come along with, because he's not, he used to be part of the member of the IRGC, but he's not a commander, and he would give the leading efforts of the war to those commanders, I think.
Mehran, if I can finish with you, I'm not going to get you to predict the outcome of the war, obviously, but can you just give us an idea of what you think he needs to do in the days and weeks ahead to ensure the stability in the short term, at least, of Iran?
Well, I think he is facing a very critical task. What we're seeing is that the Iranians, as Hassan just said, are counting on a prolonged war. And if he can show resilience, if Khamenei can show resilience of Iran and survival and continue to hit targets in Israel and American targets, if that can happen, I think that in itself is a symbolic victory, if not necessarily a military victory, that he can then take to the commanders of the Revolutionary Guards and say, fight on.
Thank you so much. We really do appreciate all your time, all your insight into this. We'll have to leave it there. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. Hassan, Mehran and Alex, we really do appreciate it. Well, thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website. That's aljazeera.com. For further discussion, you can go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. For me, Tom McRae, and the entire team here in Doha, goodbye for now.
It's 6 GMT, 9 a.m. in Doha. Hello, I'm Fuli Batibo. You're watching Al Jazeera's continuing coverage of the conflict between the U.S., Israel, and Iran.
We're winning very decisively. We're way ahead of schedule.
President Donald Trump says the war with Iran will end soon, saying the U.S. and Israel are close to completing their objectives. Trump's comments spark a rally on Asian markets following a day of soaring oil prices and volatile trading. A heavy wave of strikes hit several cities in Iran. Tehran remains defiant, saying it's ready for a long war. And Israel says it's looking to expand its operation in southern Lebanon as the Lebanese government calls for direct talks to end the fighting. President Donald Trump says the U.S. and Israel are close to completing their objectives in Iran and that the war will end very soon, but not this week. Iran's military has dismissed his comments as nonsense and is continuing its counterattacks on Israel and the U.S. assets in the Gulf. Mike Hanna begins our coverage with this report from Washington.
Where there's pride in every American heart.
President Trump took time out from monitoring the conflict to address Republican House members at his Florida golf club.
We're the hottest country anywhere in the world.
It was a speech very much focused on domestic political issues, though he did offer yet another time frame on U.S. operations.
I think you'll see it's going to be a short-term excursion.
At a subsequent news conference, he was asked directly when the operation would end.
I think so.
Okay, and with respect
very soon.
56-year-old Moshaber Khamenei is the son of the previous Ayatollah, who was killed in the first hours of the conflict. He's believed to be closely associated with hardline elements within Iran. But President Trump would not be drawn if the new leader would be targeted like his father.
Well, I don't want to say that, but you know, I was disappointed because we think it's going to lead to just more of the same problem for the country. So I was disappointed to see their choice.
The president claimed Iran's missile stocks have been depleted by some 90%, and that its drone production capabilities have been severely curtailed or even ended. The new leader has the power to remove the religious edict or fatwa his father imposed on the production and development of nuclear weapons, which he declared to be haram or forbidden. President Trump has made no reference to this fatwa, but he's brought about a change in leadership in which the one guardrail against the Iranian development of nuclear weapons may well be removed. Mike Hanna, Al Jazeera, at the White House.
Well, we have a team of correspondents covering all the latest developments from Tehran, Doha, Ramallah in the occupied West Bank and Beijing. We begin with Roslyn Jordan in Washington, D.C. Ros, do we have any more clarity on when and how this war ends?
There isn't much more clarity on when and how the war on Iran ends. Certainly, the U.S. President Donald Trump was giving mixed messages when speaking to various media outlets on Monday. He earlier in the day indicated that the biggest part of the war might have already been concluded over the previous weekend. But then later in Florida, when he was giving a press conference on Monday, he indicated that the conflict might go on for perhaps another week or so. The other question, which he did not clarify, is with how much intensity will the U.S. continue to attack Iranian targets? The president has not definitively ruled out the use of ground troops. This has been so far primarily an air war on Iranian targets, but the president has said that he wants to make certain that the Iranian military is effectively hobbled, cannot cause any offensive attacks of its own, whether on U.S. targets or on targets related to U.S.'s allies. So this is a question that has people still wondering really what does come next. There is some speculation that the president had to address the duration of this war because of the impact on global energy prices. We saw the price of a barrel of oil rise some $50 in the course of perhaps 36 hours, and that was already leading to price jumps of about 50 cents per gallon for people here in the United States just trying to put fuel in their cars and trucks. And so when the economy becomes top of mind for U.S. voters, that becomes a political liability, and that might have been, some suggest, why the president was trying to talk about the duration of the war, one which is now in its 11th day.
Tawhida Sadi in Tehran, how are Iranian officials reacting to President Trump's comments that the war will end soon?
Well, actually, rhetorically speaking, we have heard from different officials, including Iranian Foreign Minister and as well as the IRGC officials, all coming out to say that how long the war is going to take and when it's going to be ended is a question for us, and we will determine the answer to that question. This is what we hear from the Iranian side, while on the other hand, the reality on the ground is far from any point of de-escalation, as we have been witnessing the continuation of the airstrikes by the Americans and Israelis targeting different places across the country and including here in the capital. Last night, we were able to hear the multiple aftersound of massive and really massive blasts in different parts of the city. Here in Tehran also, we've got reports from Karaj, from Isfahan, from Ahvaz, from Tabriz, different cities in different locations of the city, all indicating the very fact that the trajectory down the road is nothing to do with de-escalation, as we continue to witness the bombardment of different cities across the country, living fatalities. And in one case, in Resalat Square, we know that at least 40 people have lost their lives as a result of one of these strikes, according to the Iranian media reports. And of course, we know that electricity shortage, electricity problems are reported in the city of Karaj. And on the other hand, we see the retaliatory actions continued, and IRGC, the Revolutionary Guards, came out very recently to say that our warheads are going to be +1 ton in the recent and next attacks that we're going to have. All in all, what we hear from Tehran, specifically yesterday from the spokesperson of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ismail Baghai, he came out to say that as long as these military strikes are continuing to target the Iranian territories, the answer is not going to be negotiation, but crushing retaliation. This is what we heard from him. And of course, this is echo of the same statement that we have been hearing from other diplomats, including the deputy foreign minister of the country, all saying that the exigency of the situation right now is neither ceasefire nor negotiation, but there is a possibility for that in case these attacks are stopped, and there might be a potentiality for diplomatic solution. But the reality on the ground right now doesn't seem so.
Tawhida Sadi in Tehran, thank you for that. Let's go over to Nida Ibrahim now in the occupied West Bank in Ramallah. Nida, the U.S. and Israel, of course, are in this together, in this war against Iran together. How are Israeli officials viewing President Trump's comments that the conflict might be winding down?
Well, Polly, yes, they are together, but from the beginning, we saw that their goals from this war did not align 100%. While the U.S. has been talking about regime change minimally, not saying this word in the past few days, but talking about the surrender, as U.S. President Donald Trump put it, Israel has always been talking about crushing the Iranian threat, making sure that this, what they call an existential threat, no longer exists. and changing their regime. And they believe that ending the war in what they think is prematurely or early would not help them get their goals of the war. And on the contrary, there are Israeli media analysts, Israeli military analysts rather, in the media saying that this could actually backfire and bringing the war to an end now would be in the benefit of Hezbollah and the regime in Tehran. These are the main criticism or main talking points in Israeli media, talking about Trump saying that he's been saying some conflicting messages and delivering some conflicting messages. Let's not forget that today we were supposed to have Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law, and his Mideast envoy, Steve Witkoff, coming here to the region. But that visit has been cancelled, and that could be seen in the eye of these differences. Now, the main issue for the U.S. administration now is the Israeli attacks on oil facilities in Iran. And while the U.S. thought that this would be some sort of an initial strike here or there, it continued and expanded, and that makes the U.S. worry not only on energy prices, but that strategically that this could backfire and rally Iranians behind the regime, which is not what the U.S. or Israel want.
Meanwhile, Nida, Israeli cities have come under attack by Hezbollah and Iranian forces overnight. Warning sirens were activated throughout Tel Aviv when air defense systems were triggered to intercept incoming projectiles. In the port of Haifa, a security camera caught a flurry of interceptions early on Tuesday. Nida, these rocket attacks are continuing across several areas in Israel today. Tell us about what's been happening and the impact it's having on people's lives.
Well, there is an increasing worry amongst Israelis of the drones that are being sent by Hezbollah into Israeli territories, saying that some of these drones have not been fully intercepted. They made their way to longer places or they flew to areas that they were not supposed to, according to the Israelis, and that increased their fears. They're also talking about anti-tank missiles that Hezbollah is using that they believe are more developed than what they had anticipated in the beginning. And we've heard that in the past few days, Israeli military analysts saying that they had underestimated the power of Hezbollah and that the army needs to crack down more and more on them. But that could be seen in the pretext of the Israeli military's intentions to expand the military operation and assault on southern Lebanon to create what they call a security buffer zone in the southern Litani River to kind of protect the Israeli communities living in the north of Israel. Again, these Iranian missiles also have been targeting Israelis. Yesterday, we had 2 killed in a construction site in Israel after these fragmented warheads, cluster munition missiles have been sent in from Iran. That is also increasing the worries of Israelis of what capabilities the Iranians and Hezbollah have and the lack of their ability in all times to intercept them.
Nida, thank you very much for that. That's Al Jazeera's Nida Ibrahim reporting from Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. And there have been several Iranian strikes in the Gulf region. In Bahrain, a residential tower was hit in the Sif district of the capital, Manama. Officials say a 29-year-old woman died and 8 people were injured. The UAE and Kuwait say they have also been intercepting missiles and drones. Axel Zaimovic is keeping an eye on the situation across the region for us from here in Doha. So more Iranian strikes across the Gulf in the last 24 hours. What's been the scale and impact of these attacks?
Well, authorities across the region are now sharing more details so we can understand the scale of these attacks in the past 24 hours. What we understand in the United Arab Emirates, we're hearing that air defense systems over there are dealing with a large number of missiles and drones coming from the Islamic Republic of Iran. In Kuwait, we understand the 6 drones were intercepted and destroyed, but also In Bahrain, you mentioned a 29-year-old woman was killed when a projectile hit a residential building over there. But what we are actually seeing in the past 24 hours is that these attacks are particularly targeting energy infrastructure. So, for example, in Bahrain, we understand that the Babco oil field has come under attack, a drone attack in the past 24 hours. The company operating that field, they say they have to basically declare something that's called force majeure. That means that some of its contractual obligations were not supposed to be met because of these disruptions. But they also maintain that domestic fuel supplies are secure for the time being. And we're also seeing that across Saudi Arabia, in particularly the oil field in Shaiban was targeted by a drone attack. And authorities there, they say that particular location has come under fire excessively in the past couple of days. And this is really posing some serious questions about the security of energy coming from the Gulf. And that was partially addressed in a statement by Qatar's Prime Minister and Foreign Minister, Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman bin Jassim Al Thani. He said Qatar has long been a strong supplier of energy, coming from this region to the rest of the world. But given that these circumstances are putting Qatar and other countries in the region in a very difficult position, so they had to stop some of the productions. And they say that those supplies will start moving forward once the situation in the region is more stable.
Axel, thank you for the update. Axel Zaimovic in Doha. Well, global markets have showed signs of rebounding as investors grow optimistic that the Middle East conflict could end soon following the recent comments from President Trump. Early trading shows Asian markets have been helped by a dip in oil prices. Stocks in China and Hong Kong have been bouncing back from their lowest levels since December and August. Many countries in Asia depend on oil and gas from Gulf states. Katrina Yu is joining us from Beijing for more. Quite a rebound, Katrina, across Asian markets. Tell us how they're doing.
That's right. Well, in the past 24 hours on the ground in this conflict, there seems to be no real difference made. But if you look at the markets in Asia, it seems that all the difference has been made. And really, that's just from largely Trump's statement that the war in Iran will be over soon. We don't know when. It will certainly not be over at the end of the week, but just that word soon seems to have been enough to calm the nerves of many investors here across Asia after that Monday plunge due to the uncertainty of this war continuing on Tuesday. Many of those markets have now made quite a comeback. The best performing so far is the market in South Korea, the Kospi. Now, South Korea in particular is vulnerable to any disruptions of any energy exports coming from the Gulf. Already since the war in Iran, the circuit breakers in the stock market in South Korea have been triggered twice. Now, on Tuesday, it made a gain of 4.67%, and that's after falling almost 6% on Monday. The Nikkei in Japan is up 2.45%. In Australia, Taiwan, Singapore, and India, the markets are up about 1%. In Hong Kong, it's up 1.71%. And in Shanghai, the market is up just about 0.5%. And if you take the emerging markets in general, there's an emerging market stock index that's up 3%. That means that today is its best performing day since February. And it's not only the stock markets that seem to be doing very well. Currencies across Asia are also strengthening, in particular the Malaysian ringgit and the Thai baht.
Markets are up, but oil is down, Katrina.
Yes, and I think that is for the markets very, very good news. We had on Monday the price of crude oil per barrel shoot up, exceeding that psychological price point of $100. It went up to almost $120 on Monday morning here in Asia. Now on Tuesday is back down below that $100 mark. It's around $90 now per barrel. So I think that shows how much investors had been soothed. And it's not just Trump's words about the war apparently ending soon. It's also his words that U.S. Navy vessels will be escorting tankers through the Strait of Hormuz, as well as as a possibility that the U.S. will be lifting some oil-related sanctions. And of course, we had that news earlier in the week that the G7 finance ministers met and said that they are considering the option of releasing some oil from their strategic reserves. All of this are all signals pointing to the easing of these market conditions. And investors, I think some of them at least, are seeing a light at the end of this tunnel.
All right, a light at the end of the tunnel, no doubt. Thank you, Katrina, for that. Katrina, you in Beijing. Now, even as he said the war could end soon, President Trump has warned that Iran will be hit, quote, 20 times harder if it stops the flow of oil through the Strait of Hormuz. Fuel prices have gone up across the world after Iran's strikes forced many oil and gas facilities in the Gulf region to shut down. The Strait of Hormuz is effectively closed. The area is a transit point for 20% of the world's oil and gas. Kulsum Sharif explains.
Since the start of the conflict, some of the major oil and gas producers in the Middle East have halted production one by one. So oil exports have abruptly stopped right from Qatar to Iraq due to attacks on energy infrastructure. Now, nearly half of the world's oil reserves and production comes from this region. Now, Saudi Arabia is a leading exporter. Now, this image should explain why it was forced to halt production at one of its biggest domestic oil refinery, Ras Tanura. Debris from an intercepted Iranian drone caused a fire here. Now, apart from crude oil exports, the Middle East is also a powerhouse when it comes to liquefied natural gas. Now, Qatar is a leading producer, supplying nearly 20% of global LNG. Now, it operates a field along with Iran. Now, this is South Pass North Dome field. Now, the south portion of it is operated by Qatar and the northern part of it by Iran. But production has completely stopped here. Even if production were to continue, we have another problem, the problem of transportation, because the Iranian threats have effectively shut the Strait of Hormuz. So all the oil and gas that has been produced in the region is not being supplied through. Normally, most of the supplies go through the Strait of Hormuz to Asia, but some of them also to Europe, right up from the Arabian Sea and through the Suez Canal. Now, the closure of the strait has already pushed up oil and gas prices. And the world has actually seen that play out after Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Now, stock markets have slumped, oil prices have jumped right from Asia to America.
Gas prices have shot up in the U.S. since the start of the war, even though it's not as dependent on energy from the Middle East compared to Europe and Asia. Kristen Salumi reports from New York.
At petrol stations across the United States, sticker shock as fuel prices hit their highest levels in 4 years.
It went to like $3.15, now it's at $3.96. So it's a crazy jump.
A conflict halfway around the world with seemingly no end in sight is hitting home for Americans.
I don't have a choice because I have to drive to work every day. So it seems like I have to swallow it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Are you worried?
I am actually, yes. Yeah. See, every couple cents matters.
If I use like 10 gallons, it's $6 up per day. It's a lot. In a month, it's like 180.
Americans are waking up to the reality of higher fuel prices. Here in New York, we're seeing prices that start around $3.79 a gallon. That's slightly higher than the national average and 50 cents higher than what consumers were seeing just a week ago. That's a 17% increase, and that really adds up when you're filling up the tank. Over the weekend, President Donald Trump said higher costs were a small price to pay for an Iran without nuclear weapons, and was non-committal when asked if it was time to start tapping the country's strategic petroleum reserves.
We will start at the appropriate time, which is basically a gut instinct. We will start filling up these strategic reserves.
More than a week of Iranian retaliatory strikes have closed key oil and gas facilities in the Gulf and dramatically reduced production in the region, which is responsible for about 20% of the world's oil supplies. What's more, tanker traffic through the vital Strait of Hormuz has ground to a virtual halt because of the fighting. And pressure on the U.S. president is building. The U.S. Senate's opposition leader, Chuck Schumer, criticized the president's position, saying on social media he couldn't care less about petrol prices. The U.S. may be the largest oil producer in the world, but shortfalls in production elsewhere will mean higher oil prices everywhere. And Americans paying the price for an attack polls say only 1 in 4 supported. Kristen Salumi, Al Jazeera, New York.
Well, let's discuss all these latest developments now in this war with our diplomatic editor, James Space, who joins me here in the studio. James, everyone really looking at President Trump and those comments out of Washington last night. When he says the war could be over soon, is it just meant to calm the markets, or is he actually looking for an exit strategy?
Well, normally President Trump has a very freewheeling style. He says what comes into his head. Sometimes he contradicts himself. He was still doing that. But I do think there is a pressure on him because his words do move the markets. It was interesting that before the news conference, he phoned up reporters, as he has been doing throughout the now 11 days of war that we've had. And in a call with CBS, he said the war was very complete, pretty much. We're very far ahead of schedule. And that was before the markets closed, or the US markets. And then in the news conference, will it be over this week? No. So even there, I think there's a difference, because the president, I think, knows that he has to sound like the strong leader in wartime. He has to be tough on Iran, but at the same time, I think they're deeply concerned about what's going on with the stock markets and what that means for two things. Number one, the US economy. Yes, the US, as we've heard, not as directly impacted with regard to energy as some other countries, but the wider economy is so interlinked that it's going to affect the US economy going forward and potentially affect inflation. And of course, that, and it seems a bit unseemly to talk about politics when we're seeing so many people dying, particularly in Iran and in Lebanon, but the midterm elections are just 238 days away on November the 3rd, and he knows politically this war is unpopular, and an economy that gets worse will make him even more unpopular.
Yeah, as you said, mixed messages from the Trump administration's differences between what he said earlier in the evening and much later. And those differences also could come to the fore, as we heard from Nida, with Israel, with whom the U.S. is engaged in this war against Iran. Israel doesn't want this war to end right away.
Yep, there are two countries involved, and Israel has been delegated half of this fight. They are the ones that are responsible for the part of Iran that includes Tehran. They are the country that is bombing the Iranian capital right now. They have a say. It's effectively a joint venture operation. And we know Prime Minister Netanyahu's comments for many decades have made it clear he wants regime change. He doesn't want a new leader in Iran. He wants a completely different sort of rule. And certainly it won't be happy with the fact that the son of the Ayatollah, who may well now, after everything that's happened, behave in a more hardline way, is going to be in charge. I think even among the US and among some of its allies, there'll be a concern that you're going to have a government in Iran at the end of this war that may actually now want to have a bomb. And Iran's geographical position does not change. It is there beside the Straits of Hormuz, this choke point, a wounded animal, you could say, still with some missile capability that could fire at will going forward, even if this war were to end right now.
Right. And interesting, Kamal Karazi, the foreign policy advisor to the new supreme leader, has said there is no longer room for diplomacy with the U.S. and that the Iranian army is ready for a long war. Iran is still very defiant. Is that posturing, you think, or is there still room for diplomacy?
I think
is there something going on in the backstage?
I think there's a problem ending it this time.
Yeah. Okay.
Because of the way it ended last time. There was a ceasefire on the 24th of June last year after 12 days of war. And Iran, I think some of us were rather surprised, but Iran said, yes, we'll go back to diplomacy. Iran feels that it's been cheated twice, that there was diplomacy twice, and the US, in Iran's view, used that diplomacy as a ruse to launch a war. I think it will be harder to persuade Iran to accept a ceasefire. I think there's going to be serious mistrust on both sides, suggesting that you're going to have some mechanism. Yes, this war was solely started by the US and Israel, some sort of mechanism, some sort of international reassurance for both sides about the other's intent. And that means something that President Trump probably doesn't like. We know from the past, he likes to run everything himself. But maybe they're going to need some other international players to get involved here.
And speaking of other international players, what about the Russian and the Chinese, who are supposedly very close to Iran? We haven't heard much from them. What about them And President Trump, also, as we talked about before coming on set, he's due to go to Beijing in a couple of weeks. He's due to have this big meeting with Xi Jinping. He would want this war to be over by then, wouldn't he?
Yeah, that visit is supposed to start on the last day of this month, and he's supposed to be there the first couple of days in April. Yes, I don't think he or the Chinese, they're saying at the moment the trip continues, so I don't think they want this war to continue. So I think that's another interesting moment in terms of the potential timeline of this war. But yes, China wants this to stop. Russia wants this to stop. They're permanent members of the UN Security Council. The Deputy Foreign Minister of Iran has suggested that there may be overtures taking place with the Chinese, the Russians and the French. President Macron is sending naval resources to the region, potentially, he says, to help escort shipping in the region. Could those, France on a very different side from China and Russia, but could those be the sort of players coming together to reassure both sides that could provide a mechanism if, and we're not there yet, if either the US or Iran were to agree to a ceasefire?
And we're not there yet, as you say, James. Thank you very much. James Bates is our diplomatic editor, joining me here in the studio. 6:30 GMT, you're watching Al Jazeera. Day 11 of the US-Israel war on Iran, a conflict that has already spread to large parts of the Middle East and is threatening global fuel supplies. President Donald Trump says the US and Israel are close to completing their objectives in Iran and that the war will end very soon, but not this week. Iran's Revolutionary Guard has dismissed his comments as nonsense, saying it is up to them to determine the end of the war. Global markets have shown signs of rebounding. Investors are optimistic the war on Iran could end soon following those comments from President Trump. Early trading shows a dip in oil prices has helped Asian markets. But people in Iran have been experiencing some of the most intense bombardments since the US and Israel's attacks began. There were huge explosions overnight in Karaj, close to the capital, Tehran. Several homes were destroyed. Hassan Ahmadian is an associate professor at the University of Tehran. He says although Iran is paying a heavy price, they will not ask for a ceasefire.
Iranian officials, specifically commanders managing Iran's war effort against this aggression, are saying that we are not close to the end. We are exacting pain. We will continue to do so to shield the country from aggressions moving forward. So it's not only about the ceasefire for the Iranians. And I think there will be more comments by Trump because the Iranians are refusing to talk about ceasefire at this point. The picture in Tehran is that Iran is strong in its stance and it's hitting back. Military experts here are saying that with this intensity, Iran can continue for 6 months with the intensity that we see. They have lowered the launching of missiles, but the drone attacks are the main story for Iranians. The missiles are, the final blow, so to speak, when it comes to Iran's attacks. But of course, on Israel, the missiles are the main story, and they are, it seems, very, very much effective. There's no illusion in Tehran. Iran is paying a heavy price. But the sense I get is that we are paying a heavy price. It's better to pay it once and for all and stop further aggression on the country. And so they're determined to continue exacting more pain. Within the Iranian leadership, it seems that the war efforts will continue as planned before the war. They talked about regionalizing of the war and hitting U.S. bases and assets in parallel with those of Israel, and they are continuing that. Actually, after the announcement of the new supreme leader election, we saw, as I said, one of the heaviest strikes on Israel last night and today in the morning. And so Iran is being hit, but it is hitting back. And I think it's going according to plan, as I hear from people here.
Syria's army says Hezbollah has fired artillery towards its positions along the Lebanese border. The army says it was targeted near the town of Sergaya. It's warned it won't tolerate any aggression against Syria. In southern Lebanon, meanwhile, Israeli forces have been shelling the town of Qiyam. Hezbollah says it's attacked 2 tanks during an attempted Israeli incursion. The Lebanese government has called for direct talks with Israel. And Israeli media is reporting that Israel intends to expand its buffer zone with Lebanon beyond its current presence in the south, a move that is being discussed apparently with the Trump administration. Let's bring in Zaina Khodr, Al Jazeera's Zaina Khodr, who's live for us from Zahrani in southern Lebanon. So while Israel is continuing to strike across the country, Zaina, there's a fierce battle along that border. Tell us about what's been happening.
There is a battle for control over southern Lebanon. The Israeli military has increased its troop presence along that border and within Lebanese territory as they try to advance deeper inside Lebanon. The Israeli Broadcasting Authority reporting that the Israeli government is discussing the possibility of expanding its presence, expanding the buffer zone that it controls along southern Lebanon. We have to remember it controls 5 hilltop positions within Lebanese territory. Now, Hezbollah saying that it has so far repelled advances made by Israeli troops in a number of axes, in a number of border towns. Last night, there were fierce clashes in Khiam, with Hezbollah saying that they destroyed an Israeli tank. It's not the first time they have made that claim since the fighting began, but the Israeli army has acknowledged that it has lost 2 soldiers in anti-tank fire in the past week. So week 2 of this conflict, the war really moving ahead in the south of the country, the Israeli military issuing yet another evacuation order telling people to leave the area south of the Litani. It really wants to empty that whole area of residents as it tries to push forward. On Sunday, we understand that Israeli troops tried to reach the village of Taibi, and that's a very strategic town because it's on a hill, a very strategic location. So what it seems, Israeli military movements, they're trying to reach hilltop positions to be able to control that whole area. Hezbollah remaining defiant, putting up a fight.
using the democratic infrastructure and norms
into its territory after recent attacks on Iranian Kurdish groups in northern Iraq. Al Jazeera's Assad Beg reports from the Iraq-Iran border.
We're here near the Iraq-Iran border, where in recent days Iraqi authorities have deployed additional security forces as rising tensions from the widening conflict continue to spill over into northern Iraq. Behind me is the frontier with Iran, a mountainous area that has long been used by
Lines deliver news, insight, and analysis live
want Iranian opposition groups launching operations into Iran. Secondly, it shows Iran that Iraq is serious about the 2023 security agreement. Now, under that agreement, Baghdad said it would clamp down on Iranian Kurdish opposition groups inside northern Iraq. Also, it signals to those specific Iranian Kurdish armed opposition groups that the additional forces make it very difficult for them to move into Iran, something that Iran has accused those groups of doing. But all this comes as there are increased tensions here in Iraqi Kurdistan. In recent days, armed groups, Iraqi groups aligned to Iran, have launched multiple drone and missile strikes across Iraqi Kurdistan, including the cities of Erbil and Sulaymaniyah. As a result of those strikes, there have been deaths and injuries. Now, the regional Kurdish government seems to be losing patience. The president of the regional Kurdish government, Masoud Barzani, has said that the Kurdish people have always been peaceful and sought coexistence, but there are limits to self-restraint. He called on Baghdad to clamp down